Ned, you've given us an interesting hook when you wrote that you were going to talk about things to hang your camera on and things to hang onto your camera. Let's start with the things that hang on cameras. What's caught your eye?
Well, what's been catching my eye lately is a lot of this small but powerful lighting. And I'll mention two brands in particular. I've got the whole new Lytra kit sitting right here in front of me, as a matter of fact. And then there are also new offerings from LumaCube. And these are two very impressive little lights. They're not very expensive. We're talking in the $100 range, but particularly with the Lytra, I'm looking at it now where there is a softbox attachment. There's barn doors. There are diffusers. They have variable color temperature and intensities, and the light is very true. It's excellent and very high lumen. These are impressive little lights.
Now, there were two companies you mentioned. Which were the company names again?
Lytra and LumaCube.
Have you worked with the LumaCube? I have been getting emails from them about 5 times a day. So their marketing is aggressive, but I have not yet had a chance to buy any. Have you played with them yet?
Yes, I've played with them. I would say Lytra and LumaCube are pretty much the same quality of light. They each have their own little hooks. The LumaCube is waterproof and a little more sealed. The Lytra just projects its light a little differently, but in practicality, they really both are going to be about the same. It's a matter of just what your own personal preference might be. Both are going to have a maximum life of really a little over an hour, but if you run them at full power, it will be less. There's USB charging. However, if you have a camera that has a USB output on it, that also provides power. You could power your little light from that.
Well, the LumaCube is the size of a children's building block. It's about a 1-inch square. Is it really generate enough light to be able to illuminate anything besides itself? It
puts out a lot of light. Both the Lytra and the LumaCube are about the same size. It puts out up to 1,500 lumens. But, again, for an on-camera light, you're really not looking to light an auditorium or light an entire set. This is for fill or for facial lighting for interviews or relatively small areas for documentary or handheld work. That's with really any on-camera light. Nobody has quite come out with a full HMI 2,000 watt equivalent to hang on your camera.
I'd be afraid to turn that one on. I think
that's right. Yeah, but seriously, I think particularly where you have options for these now that range from barn doors to diffusers with the softbox, for example. These can be very nice interview lights on your camera if you're really operating as a solo operator and run and gun and don't have the luxury of being able to come up with a multiple light setup.
Cool. All right. Well, let's hear something else. What else you got?
Well, there also are, of course, microphones. In the low end of things, inexpensive, that Rode video mic has been around for ages, and it's a pretty good piece of audio equipment for the money, and certainly very useful for mirrorless / DSLR shooters. If you are obviously looking at higher level mics, of course, those can always be hung onto that camera as well. Even with small mixers that you could attach on it, I still have a Sound Devices Mixed 3D. It's a two mic mixer. It's a pretty expensive thing, but Sound Devices are not exactly a cheap product. However, you very much get what you pay for with it. You can hang a little mixer onto the camera and be able to mix two mics. So I think on-camera audio is important. But then as well, look at a company called Tether Tools. They make all kinds of interesting things, from power adapters to something that they call a jerk stopper for cables, particularly if you're having to deal with HDMI cables coming in and out of your camera. There's no locking on that whatsoever. Just like the old FireWire cables. Remember that? We're old enough to remember FireWire. Things can pull out very easily.
I'm quite old enough to remember FireWire. Thank you very much.
The worst of it was that 4-pin Sony cable. That engineer should have just been thrown off of Mount Fuji for coming up with that 4-pin cable. And they always pulled out. But now with Tether Tools and other manufacturers as well, there are stoppers to be able to secure that cable, and a variety of arms. And don't forget, if you have a wireless mic, to be able to put a holder on that for wireless mics, which brings me to the fact that if you are going to be hanging gear on your camera, regardless of a mirrorless DSLR or a traditional video camera, really a good idea to have a cheese plate so that you have multiple attachment points for all of these mics and mounts and arms and everything else that you're going to be putting on these cameras.
Now, what did you call that again?
A cheese plate.
A cheese plate. Why a cheese plate?
Well, because it's got holes like Swiss cheese. We should call it a Swiss cheese plate or an Emmentaler cheese plate rather than just a cheese plate. But just something that has all the holes in it, and that's on most mounts. Most cameras today have a couple of mounting points on the camera itself or on the camera handle. But it's always good to have something with multiple mounting points.
Now, does it just
be in a cage or just an add-on to the top of your camera?
Just so I understand, because I haven't worked with cheese plates for a long time, the camera mounts to this piece of aluminum that's got holes in it, and that's what mounts to the tripod?
Can mount on top of your camera.
Oh, on top of the camera.
Depends on the configuration, or it could be, like with the DSLRs and mirrorless particularly, cages are very popular. And on those cages, you're going to have cheese plate-like multiple attachment points. For example, in my FS7, I have one where the handle comes off of it, mount the cheese plate on top. You can mount the handle back on it. You have a number of different mounting points, particularly for articulating arms and things like that, where you may be wanting to mount lights or attach that wireless mic adapter.
Eric's, who's listening in our live chat, is saying that he mounts his with rods to the rear of the camera just to be able to have more accessories attached.
Absolutely. That's another way of doing it. And particularly if you're going to be attaching batteries to it as well. That's another important thing that you may be wanting to attach is external batteries.
Well, let's just get a quick laundry list of the companies you've mentioned. You've mentioned LumaCube, and you've mentioned Tether Tools, and who else?
And I've mentioned Lytra. I've mentioned Rode. And there's some of the, there certainly are others. In terms of lighting, there's another lighting company that I want to mention. That's Aladdin. They have this great little eye light that's inexpensive, but really it's just a great thing to have on the camera for eye light and fill. And they have a few other camera mounts. They're a little, again, on the pricey side. But honestly, what I find is a bargain isn't a bargain if you don't get acceptable results out of it. So I don't necessarily look for the least expensive of products, particularly in lighting. Although LEDs are getting better, you still have to watch for color discrepancies and color fidelity and CRI and other things that measure the fidelity of your color.
Well, you make a good point. Saving money and ruining a scene is not a cost-effective way to save money.
Exactly. One of the things that I really try to advise people when they ask me about cameras and gear and getting started is really the camera is probably almost the smallest part of your investment. It's the lighting, it's the audio, it's what you hang on to that camera. And then as we can transition to the important thing is what you hang that camera onto.